It's 2020 and new, more expensive phones are being announced. Today though, I'll be taking a look at a budget device that will definitely change the way you look at budget smartphones. There are essentially three different tiers of smartphones. The low end or budget at around $200 or less, the mid-range at $300 to $500 or $600, and flagships are at well above $700. For years, if you wanted a good smartphone, you'd have to get an iPhone or a more expensive Android. Mid-range devices were also usable but not as impressive, and budget phones literally sucked. They were usable, but since the beginning of Android, budget smartphones were just not cutting edge. All of this changed when Motorola released the Moto E, which was known as the first good budget device. OnePlus also had released their first device a month earlier, which also changed mid-range devices. By now, lots of other companies copied OnePlus, and now mid-range devices are basically flagships. But why can't budget devices break the system, if you will? Well, they can, and it's not a phone that was released recently. In 2017, Samsung released the S8, which got rid of some bezel, and LG released the G6, which also shared a similar display design. Honestly, LG doesn't have a really good reputation. Almost all their devices would eventually boot loop, but with all of that in mind, the LG G6 offers a lot going into 2020. Let's start off with build quality and design. It's really solid and looks way better than the S8 in my opinion. While it is a boring and slippery glass and metal sandwich, I really think LG nailed it here. The back and front glass are Gorilla Glass 3, so it's pretty durable, the camera doesn't look ugly, and it's all around a good looking and good feeling phone. Now let's dive into specs and performance of this device. It has a 5.7-inch True Vision 1440 by 2880 display with a 564 pixel per inch density, 18:9 aspect ratio, and Gorilla Glass 3. The CPU is the 14nm Snapdragon 821 with 4 cores with 4 GB of RAM. The GPU is the Adreno 530. Storage options vary from 32 to 64 to 128 GB, and you have a microSD card slot up to 1 TB depending on the model. For connectivity, you get dual band AC Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.2, NFC, and USB-C 3.1 with OTG support. Now as far as performance is concerned, and I'm kind of cheating because I'm using custom software, but if you plan on sticking with LG software, some of the G6s do have Pi. But I'm using Havoc OS, which is based on Android 10. But let's move on to real-world everyday performance and usability. LG software is okay, but a more stock ROM will definitely feel better, as LG and various other manufacturers' launchers are sluggish, but I'll talk more on software later. The 821 in theory has a better GPU than the likes of 700, 600, or 400 series SoCs, as higher-end graphics solutions are reserved to the flagship 800 series. The 821 still holds up fairly well even in 2020. If you're a power user, this might not be the best option, and I say that only because the performance is inconsistent. Up until the 835 SoC, Android devices in general were really capable, but had various issues or shortcomings like overheating, which causes throttling, and in turn, your phone slows down. By inconsistent, I mean when you use it for a prolonged amount of time, the RAM will get filled up, the CPU will get a little warm, but in comparison to a budget device, depending on what you use your phone for, you'll probably enjoy using the G6. You just have to understand how to optimize something here and there if you use your phone for more demanding tasks. Speaking of demanding tasks, gaming performance is pretty good. Compared to a more budget device, playing Call of Duty Mobile is pretty enjoyable at medium settings. The camera is something I was really looking forward to. It has dual 13 megapixel sensors, one normal and the other is the wide angle. I'll display some sample shots taken from a Google camera port. It's not going to dethrone a current gen device, but this still takes some pretty respectable shots. There's also a 5 megapixel selfie if that's what you're into. Audio. I'm very satisfied with the audio quality. I mean, keep in mind guys, this used to be a flagship, so it had flagship quality features, and the speaker is one of them. It's a single bottom firing unit, and this may not be the best of the best, but compared to any other actual budget device, the differences are night and day. The bass is punchy, it's loud, it's clear, and while some budget phone speakers aren't terrible, they're not going to be as loud and clear like the G6. Now let's talk about the display. Even though LG usually doesn't put OLED panels on their phones, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The G6 has a 5.7-inch 1440 by 2880 True Vision display. This isn't crazy bezel-less, but has a humble screen-to-body ratio at around 79%. This display looks really good. It gets reasonably bright, it's sharp, but it's definitely on the cooler side. It also has an ambient display with the stock software and custom, though it's not as battery friendly because the whole panel is on, rather than an OLED which can turn off the black parts and illuminate things like the time. Overall, the display is solid. Speaking of batteries, let's talk about this one. It's a 3300 mAh unit and it's okay. If you set the always on display to ambient and you use your phone lightly, you'll get about a day on a single charge, but realistically, it's like 5 to 7, maybe 8 hours. I usually have to recharge it at least once, but don't expect crazy battery life. It does have Quick Charge 3.0 with 18 watts and can do 50% in 30 minutes, nothing crazy compared to some newer charging technologies, but it's still better than nothing. Before I conclude, I'd like to touch on software. Now, officially, only a select few of the G6 devices have LG's UX 8.0 Pi. The one I have is stuck on Oreo officially, but if you plan on rooting this device, which I highly recommend doing by the way, you can not only get Pi, but even Android 10. Now, not LG software, but instead stock Android. If you want to get the most out of this device, using a custom ROM is the way to go. The US997 and H870 can officially be modified. I think there's also a method for the T-Mobile variant, but that's much riskier, as if you mess up one step, you're basically toast. If you don't know a thing about installing custom software, just want a good phone, get one of the models that have Pi. It won't be as great as a custom ROM from a performance standpoint, but it will still be usable. The only question that remains is where does a phone like this stand in 2020? And more importantly, should you even buy it? OnePlus introduced the idea of a flagship killer, and as time went on, mid-range devices became cheaper than the flagship killer and offer flagship specs, so now mid-range devices are basically the norm for flagship killers. Budget devices have improved, and now the mid-range stuff has been put on those devices, but devices with an 820 or later like the Google Pixel, or the S8 and yes, the LG G6, have become obsolete as flagships for sure, but very sufficient as mid-range devices and superior as budget ones. You don't get a lot of the features this device has for the most part on any other $100 device. Speaking of hundreds, you can expect to get the G6 used or refurbished for $100 to $150. I got one with a cracked screen and camera glass for $37 and threw on a new display and camera glass all for $60 or $70. Pretty crazy value if you ask me, but should you actually buy it? Keeping in mind about what I said about software, if you're looking for a budget device around the aforementioned price point, this may struggle a little if you're a real power user, but even then I made it work, but this will be perfect if you're just looking for a solid smartphone with features unlike a budget device. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Are previous gen flagships better than budget phones? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, along with any other questions or suggestions you have. If you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, but if not, you know where to go. While you're there, consider subscribing to the channel and enable notifications for more quality tech videos. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you later.